Okay, Rex, now, of everything I've ever seen, okay, out in the woods, this structure we're looking at, this teepee structure that I first found in 2016, and this was over near an area that, this researcher friend of ours, Rio, had shown us, and it was when we were walking out of there that we kind of walked into this. And he had not seen it before this time either, even though he looked at the surrounding area several times. This is fascinating, and this is a structure that, in my opinion, could not possibly have been built by humans. And if there's one thing in here that says this has got to prove the existence of a Sasquatch, would be the structure. Now, the first thing you need to know about it is the immense size of this thing. That crotch, that top of that teepee, the underneath is about 10 feet, okay, to the, in essence, someone or something 10 feet tall could stand upright under the top of that and not touch their head on the logs. Second of all, the largest log you see that's basically going away, and the second largest that starts off at our right and goes up to the left, are enormous in weight. The one going away from us is larger in diameter than a telephone pole. It's got to be 1,000 to 1,500 pound log, easily. And it's at least 40 feet long, the one going away from us. The large light structure that starts on the far right and goes up and out of the picture to the upper left, it probably weighs about the same, maybe a little less, but is clearly 60 feet long. Now, anybody that has a good understanding of physics realizes what kind of pressure or strength you would have to lift this up from the bottom, to have that enormous lever arm way, way out there, okay, and to be able to lift that enormous weight. In fact, humans couldn't do it because you couldn't get enough humans underneath this thing that could hold those two logs up. So the answer to that is, okay, well then obviously what would have happened is they had to bring some heavy equipment in to do it. Now, no heavy equipment. This is a mile from a road. Again, this is Utah, dry. Those scars would be visible for years. There are no scarring of big equipment has been into this area whatsoever. The next explanation would be, well, somebody took a block and tackle, climbed up in a surrounding tree, and lifted these up. The problem with that is this is in a clearing. There are no trees up above this that you could have hooked a block and tackle to raise these trees up in the air. These trees had to be lifted from the bottom and put way up in the air and then somehow held in place, because these are all being held up by the force of each other weighed against another tree. There's not one nail, one bit of twine, one bit of rope tying this all together. These are all being forced together by the weight of one log pushing on another log. I mean, the engineering of this is ingenious. And I tell you, I would defy anybody to, first of all, tell me how they could have built it, and second of all, to build it. I don't think people could have built it under those parameters. You couldn't use a block and tackle, you couldn't use heavy equipment, and you just had to have people with their hands in that lifting them from below. I don't think it's possible.
And what would you say to the people who just say this is natural deadfall or just fell like that because there's so much dead trees falling down? That's another one I've confronted with people who say that.
Well, only people who are going to say that are people, first of all, haven't been out to see it, okay? And second, people that are looking for excuses, not to try to explain the obvious. A tree can't fall this way. First of all, some of these trees are over one tree, under another tree, over one tree, under another tree. They're interwoven. They're not just falling on top of each other. I would say, okay, come out and look at this and tell me how these could have fallen. How could one tree have fallen and have another tree on top of it that's actually holding the one up that's underneath it? I mean, that's how ingenious this cotton picking thing is. If you notice the big log going straight away, it is being held up by the long tree starts at the right and goes up to the left. It's being held in place there because that tree's on topping it, pushing it down hard against that narrow little tree that comes up from the bottom left to the right, and it's pushing it down hard against that because there's a little crotch right there, okay, in there that the tree to the right is pushing on the large center tree. You're going to tell me those three things are going to all fall and somehow catch each other like that? No, it's impossible. And then the thing is this isn't going to be the only one. I mean, we're going to see a whole bunch of these. And to sit there and say, and then why are these only happening here? Why are they only happening with aspens? I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that just are way too improbable. Also, these logs across the bottom. In the foreground here, there's the great big long tree that goes across the bottom. Well, that is being used because that's holding in place some of these large trees to keep them from kicking out, okay, and falling down. So the fact you've got the weight of this holding that really long tree that starts in the middle and goes away from us in place so it can't be pushed out. Again, you've got things going on here that just could not possibly happen without some sort of engineering by something with an intelligent brain. You know, it's impossible.
Yeah, just repeating again, this is another prime example of what I was saying earlier, the jigsaw puzzle type arrangement where everything's interlocked to work simultaneously together, I guess you could say.
And like I said, this would take a doggone, someone that really understood engineering, and then even still, it's not just the understanding of it, which we as humans can do. We can see how to do it. But how do we do it?
Yep. And
we can't use a block and tackle. There's nothing to attach it to. And you can't use a crane to lift these things up. I tell you, anyway. So the next picture we've got, now this one, though it doesn't appear to be as complex as the first photo we were just describing there, the teepee structure, this is actually every bit as ingenious. What you've got here is the pole that's coming towards the camera. That actually is the butt end, the end that would have been in the ground that's up in the air, going away from the camera. And as you can see, that is leaning against a gray aspen that seems to be just kind of hanging up there in the air. Well, what happened is that aspen, the gray one, is being pushed against the other upright aspen that's slightly tilted at an angle by the first one that's going away from us. Now, the thing that you can't really see here is what's holding the whole thing together is this tree that starts in between the large two white trees. It's kind of going up at an angle. That has got a bend or I don't know what you call it, a place where there was a branch and the branch broke away. And the pole going away from the camera is pushing the gray one against that crotch to hold it up in the air. Again, it would be impossible for this to happen, to fall this way, because had this long gray pole fallen, it would have not... Yeah, it couldn't have fallen this way, because had it fallen straight down, it would have never been caught in the crotch of this tree. Now, I think my explanation is absolutely butchering this thing, because it seems way more complicated than what it appears when you look at it. But the point being this could not have fallen this way. This had to be built this way. Why would something have built it? I have no idea why someone would build this, or why anything would build this, but this is sitting up there along with a bunch of other structures. Was my explanation terrible, Rex, or did you follow any of it?
Well, I think I followed it. Where is the crotch on this? I'm not sure if it's that obvious. You
can't really see the crotch. There's the two tall white aspens that go straight up in the air.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and in between it, there is a gray-colored aspen that's kind of going up, but it's tilted at an angle. And that crotch is right on that gray aspen that's going straight up in the air, but it could have never been caught by the other gray aspen had not the one that starts towards the base of the camera and goes away from us been pushing the gray aspen into that crotch. Okay?
So
it couldn't have fallen straight down and caught there. It had to be placed there, you know what I mean, to be held up and put in position there to hold the whole thing up.
So kind of in the center of this asterisk where we have this kind of little triangle, the gray one there that's almost vertical, but it's still at an angle. It's caught on that, the one that's half stripped and half not. That's the one that's caught on the gray one there, kind of at the bottom of that triangle point. Into the crotch,
pushing the gray one in the crotch. The one that has half the bark missing, and It's pushing the gray one that has all the bark missing. It's kind of almost, parallel with the bottom edge of the picture. It's pushing that one into the crotch. And then the other side of the coin is the butt end of the one that's going away that's lost part of its bark is up in the air. That's not the top of the tree. That's the base of the tree that's up there. So how did the base get up there?
Yeah.
It's too big a tree just to fall that way. I mean,
you see that sometimes where it's been inverted and.
Yeah. So anyway, all right. Now the third one. Now this one is a little more explicable. This is, you can see there's a pole that's up in the upper left-hand corner that's kind of parallel to the ground, and you see several trees that have fallen on top of it and are held up somewhat in the air. And you can see a couple of other poles that are at an angle. A bunch of them leaned up here. The other point I wanted to make on this is, number one, the one that they're all leaning against is being held between trees because it's been kind of forced in between some upright trees so that it won't move. And then you have down here on the bottom right-hand corner, you have another tree that's laid across the bottom of one of the upright poles. And then you have another large tree that's on top of that's on top of the other bottom of the other upright pole. So you've got this interweaving of trees again in this picture that just couldn't have fallen this way. It's impossible. This had to be made or built. For what, again, and the reason, I can't give you a reason, but it had to be built. Now, we'll go to the next one down. This next picture, there is a Sasquatch researcher named Thinker Thunker, and he's posted a video out of Russia that appears to show a Sasquatch lifting a tree, shaking a tree back and forth, lifting it out of the ground and carrying it off. And this is an upright 40, 50-foot tall tree that the Sasquatch does this with. Well, this structure is a number of very tall aspens in a pine forest. And these aspens are much more narrow. They're probably only 10 inches at the base in diameter, more narrow than a lot of the bigger ones. But they're very tall. They're all 60, 70 feet tall trees, and they're all leaning in a teepee against a pine here. Now, if I remember, when I was able to get out and around and count them all, there's something like 13 of these tall aspens have been leaned up against this little grove of pines here. I think we can see 8 of them in this picture, but you have to get to the other side to see the others. But again, this is something that it just could not have happened because they surround this grove of pines, and there are all these really long, tall trees that simply couldn't have fallen here against this. Not from every different direction, the way this happened. So that's another example that I thought was very interesting.
And I think often on these, we'll try to inspect the bottom, and when it looks like there's no root structure, it looks like it's been transported. Sometimes you can even confirm almost 100% that they were transported. Sometimes it's harder to tell because they're jammed into some pine needles. Yeah,
I have a lot of smaller aspens, and you can actually lift them up and look at them. These were way too big. I mean, these were great big trees. So there was no way in the world I was going to try to lift one. I mean, first of all, I wouldn't have moved it. But second of all, last thing I wanted was something like this crashing down on me. But believe me, I've done just what you said, pulled them up out of the ground many, many times. Now, the next picture down, I call these things knots because I don't know what else to call them. They're not really a teepee, but it's just a bunch of good-sized trees just kind of shoved in all together in a chaotic mess. I think you described it as an asterisk or kind of like a star put together here. And again, the way they're structured together, if you really look at how this could have possibly fallen, often you've got bases up in the air, and it's just inexplicable, And this is just an example of one. And
I've through there, some of those.
Yeah. I've seen several of these, and I've seen them in other researchers or other people who've had videos of similar sorts of structures. This next photo is interesting because those of us that get out and hike in the woods see what we call X structures all the time. 2 trees crossed. In the areas I'm looking, they're typically aspens. What those tend to demark is that when we follow those X structures, they tend to lead to some more areas where there's a whole bunch of structures. Well, this is one of those X structures, but the thing that's interesting here, first of all, this is pretty old. Where the other structures may have been 2 or 3 or 4 years old, this is probably at least 10 years old. because these trees are fairly rotted. They've aged quite a bit. But second of all, you see over the X structure, there is a tree with a V, okay, that goes on both sides of the X structure. Now, when I looked at this closely, the base of the tree is that portion that's up in the air. Okay, that's the base. It grew, branched out, and then somehow got turned over upside down, shoved in the ground over this X structure. Again, could that have happened in nature? Well, if it could, I'd need someone to tell me how. I didn't see any way possible something like that could ever happen in nature. But I thought this was fascinating.
And I have a couple more images, I believe, of that same structure because I accompanied you on one of these excursions. So I'm just showing that right now. Here's the same structure from just another view. I believe it's kind of the opposite view, the angle. And then I got one other one, a different time of day. Also the same structure.
Okay, this structure, as you can see, is right in a campground. Now, this was right around the 1st of March of 2017. I called the camp hosts, and I got up here the first day the gate was down and they were letting cars up the road. So I got up there as early as anybody did on the first morning, and this is, you can see it's a little bit foggy, so it's early. It's probably 8 in the morning or something like that, 8:30 in the morning. And you can see that what this is right next to the picnic table, and it's a bunch of boughs and that are making kind of a screen or a blind right in the campground. And we scroll down to the next photo, which shows a close-up of the same thing, pine boughs and the pine branches between the two rocks. And we'll scroll down, and this is another view of the same structure, showing what it looks like from the front. And then we scroll down one more photo and we look at the structure from the back. Now, I've had people say, well, obviously some homeless person did that. Well, no, some homeless person didn't do that. First of all, this has just been, no one's been up here in this campground yet that year. Second of all, the road had been closed 5 or 6 miles below this up until this point. So some homeless person is going to walk up there, and look how green these boughs are. These boughs are bright and green. They've just been cut or they've just been torn off of trees. And going to build a blind, and it's going to be something that they couldn't possibly sleep in. Now look at the rocks in that around the base of that tree. Somebody could stand there, somebody could sit there, but you can't lay down in there. You can't sleep in there because of all those big rocks. This is not a structure that someone would have been able to sleep in. So I see absolutely no way that this would have been built by humans. Now, I looked at it, was kind of interested in it, and then I came back about a week and a half later. And that's the image that Rex is going to show you here of how this had grown tremendously with the number of boughs. You can see now how this has grown to probably 4 or 5 times the amount of mass of boughs of what it had previously. Now, at this point, I thought, well, maybe this is an active area. Maybe I should set some cameras up here. I hadn't set cameras before this growth happened. So I did. I sent some game cameras around this, several, okay, from different angles. And what I caught on the game cameras were a number of people looking around the structure, messing with the structure, pulling on the structure, playing hide and seek around the structure, but no Sasquatches around the structure whatsoever. And then shortly thereafter, as more and more campers started coming up into the canyon, this structure started to disappear. I suspect, basically, I had images of people pulling some of the branches away. I would guess they were either burning them or I don't know what they were doing with them. But by about the middle of June, it was completely gone. It had just been completely taken apart by campers that were in the campground.
So evidence of people dismantling it, but I bet not one shred of evidence of people adding to it. Does that sound correct?
Absolutely. Nobody tried to build on it. Nobody tried to add anything to it, with the cameras. Now, I happen to mention, too, not just this instance, but in several other instances, and primarily from watching the game that I've caught on game cameras. You have to understand, at some points I've had up to 15 to 20 game cameras all over these surrounding canyons. And I almost never post one camera. I usually post 2 or 3 cameras and post cameras on cameras so that I can see from one camera another camera, because I want to see if anybody or anything's messing with the cameras, but I want to see the reactions of the animals when the cameras go off, okay? And that was a big reason, because for years it's been said, well, game cameras don't do any good with Sasquatches because they can see them or the like, okay? Well, I've become convinced after doing this for a couple of seasons that the game cameras are going to have little to any effect unless really done the right way with Sasquatches, because I feel they see the infrared signature. And I have a couple of reasons. I think I've caught some distant eye shine that's very briefly been high, wide apart, and then disappeared, but not close enough that I can actually see any creature. I can just see some eye shine. And a naysayer would say, well, they're just bugs, because that's the way the moths and that light up. You know, they light up bright in the cameras. But also the way some of the animals react, and particularly cats. Dogs, wolves, foxes, the elk and the deer, they walk in front of these cameras and seem to make no notice of them whatsoever, okay? Sound, light, they aren't bothered at all. The cats always seem to react. Now, I've had some people say, well, they hear them. Well, why would the cats react? Their hearing shouldn't be as good as the dogs, because the dogs, the foxes, and the coyotes have much bigger ears. You know, I'm assuming they have better hearing than what the cats do. My guess is that the cats are probably seeing the infrared, because infrared is not too far out of our visible spectrum. And so as a result, and the reason I say that is, for the most part, the cats I photographed, either the cameras go off and they turn to the camera and look at it, or I catch them slinking away just as they, the cameras go off and you just catch glimpses of them as they're gliding off into the underbrush. That seems to be what happens. And these cameras are really state of the art. I've got a couple of 4K cameras. They're all high definition cameras. And in fact, in watching some of the videos, the infrared light is so bright that you can actually see the shadow on a tree behind the deer and elk when the infrared goes off. So another infrared camera is catching that shadow. So I'm guessing that if something can see this infrared, it's probably as bright as a headlight of a car to those creatures, you know what I mean, when they go out. But that's just my opinion based on what I've seen. And I don't know that's true, but it makes sense to me. What do you think?
Just to add, to be clear, these are trail cams that have an infrared detection area. I think we had one comment from someone who thought that these type of cameras exclusively use sound waves, but I did a little research after the fact and it seemed like that's more commonly used for a home security device. And some of the trail cams, in addition to using infrared, will also use a heat detection at the same time. I think there's one by Browning I saw that features both of those. So just to mention that you know what you're talking about, the type of trail cams you have, you're familiar with those, and you're not just... So I think his wording was you were ignorant of the way that these cams work, or something like that, to that effect.
Yeah, well, the thing is, from what I've seen, and there may be a new state-of-the-art camera I haven't seen yet, because I've been looking for pure thermal-driven cameras, and I have not found one, okay, that anyone offer. Now, you have to understand, thermal is a lot more complicated than infrared. In thermal, the high-end thermal imagery cameras have to actually use liquid nitrogen, okay, in them in order, and that's part of the reason why they're so incredibly expensive. You know, a good thermal camera is a $12,000 to $25,000 camera, okay, a digital thermal camera. Now that price may be down. I haven't looked at those prices in a couple of years. The standard commercial grade ones that you see out there are still in the $5,000 to $7,000 range. Yeah, but I am not aware of any of these sort of outdoor cameras that are thermal driven. I've never seen one, never heard of one, and I have been looking for it. So I'm not sure exactly what Browning has. Like I said, they may have something now, but it's been at least a year and a half since I looked last, and I hadn't seen anything back then. But I've got 4K cameras, so I've got state of the art. I mean, what at the time was state of the art stuff, and there aren't a lot of 4K cameras out there right now. Almost everything is high definition.
Well, I think my understanding was that the Browning when I was looking at it, used heat detection, but it wasn't actually recording thermal video, that type of thing. I didn't mean to say that. It just had a thermal detection, whereas it could tell the heat. I don't think it was recording a thermal imagery of that type that you would see. Okay.
I think that's all the cameras that I have, but I think that's how all of them are triggered, okay, is they call them passive.
Yeah, PI
passive
or something
infrared.
like that, yeah.
Yeah, and the idea being is that the temperature difference when something is moving in front is what sets off the trigger, so you don't have the infrared out there all the time pulsing, okay, to do that. So that is apparently how at least all the cameras that I have are triggered. But the problem is once they take a picture, it isn't using infrared, and that's what's creating the visibility. And to me, it just makes sense how it appears Sasquatches work in things. I don't think they just come crashing into any area. I think that when they're coming in, they move in very quietly, very slowly, take a good look around, not until they're absolutely comfortable that there's nothing in there, nothing dangerous, nothing they need to be alarmed about, do they actually come in and start doing whatever they intend to do. And so I would tend to think that something would probably trigger one of those cameras going off, or maybe them moving in slowly, they would trigger from a distance, or the camera, you're at enough distance where you can trigger the camera, but you can't really see anything because the infrared isn't getting out there far enough. Which, like I said, I think I've seen in a couple of images, what appear to be high off the ground, light from eye reflection. But it goes off and it disappears real quick. It's gone. You know what I mean? And it's just at the very, very far edge of what the cameras can get any image. And you're probably 50, 60, 70 feet away. And so you can't make out any image, but you can see the little bit of eye shine that's out there. And that appears. But like I said, it could be bugs. Anybody could argue and say, well, no, that's bugs. So that's a tough one. I don't have anything conclusive on that. Now, I think I've mentioned to you before, I've started mounting my cameras now high off the ground for two reasons: to take them out of the line of sight of things and also keep them away from people. The biggest problem I have are, knuckleheads out there feeling that expensive equipment in the woods is, they have the right to destroy this stuff, which I will never understand, but that's what they do. But I think that's the better bet. And also put them in the areas where Sasquatches are getting used to lights, okay? It's been well known that there are areas where there are dumpsters and things like that where Sasquatches have been known or been told that they frequent, and they're near streetlights. If I had a place like that and could mount them high up off the ground near the streetlights, I would try that. I would think there'd be a reasonable chance that they'd seen the streetlights. They may not notice the infrared. But again, that's my opinion. I don't know that that's right or not. In the previous video, there were some comments. When I was out in Nevada, I had found a structure that could not accommodate a roof. And some people said, well, I didn't know what I was talking about because the roofs burn and they fall in. And no, these stone structures were built not to have a roof. Okay? And I noticed one of the videos that you posted had a structure or two very similar to what I remember seeing in Nevada. So, Rex, why don't I let you talk about that, because this is actually very similar to what I was finding out in the Buck Mountains in central Nevada.
Sure. I posted a recent video right after the interview one, and you happened to come up on it. We're up a canyon called Rock Canyon, and there's a lot of limestone all around. And so I have the image up right now where you felt was very similar to what you're seeing out in Nevada. And if anyone's looking at that, you can see, it is stacked almost to chest level, but it's not something where you're going to be able to put a roof on it, and it's far too haphazard. Another thing I just want to mention briefly, I didn't get it recorded, we actually were talking about it, but if you look at the way this one's constructed, there are large rocks on top of little rocks. Maybe this particular photo isn't the best example, but when we were out there, there's 100-pound, 100, 200, 300-pound possibly rocks that are heaved up on top of smaller rocks, and so they had them placed there, and it just seems unlikely that a human could roll things around to that point. So I just thought I'd mention that. This is an example that he felt was, in some ways, was similar to what you're seeing out there in the desert areas.
Yeah, I guess the point being is that the kind of inexplicable nature of, you get used to seeing the way people build things, and then you suddenly see this structure that is just, it's similar, but it's built entirely different, with a different way of thinking and a different type of skills, and that's the point. You know, I saw a whole bunch of stone buildings when I was in Nevada because I spent several springs and summers out there walking around. I think 3 or 4 years I was out there all the time. And I found a number of them, maybe close to 20. And they were all fairly similar, and they're all, you know, had characteristics and pretty identifiable, and no question that any one of those weren't human-made. Except I come across the one structure I mentioned to you that was just completely different. The inexplicable nature of how some of these structures are made, when you see 7, 8, 10, 12 made by humans and they're all similar, rock sizes are similar, the way they're stacked are similar, the way the fireplaces are built are similar, and then you see one that is entirely different, like you say, stone sizes that are completely out of whack with each other, walls that aren't lined up right, walls that aren't the same height, walls that one slightly tilt, one straight up. I mean, just ski-wampus. Just the best thing I could say is imagine how a 3 or 4-year-old would build a building, and that's kind of how I remember that structure being, and that's somewhat how I looked at some of what you were showing us there.
Yeah, it's almost as if you had a gargantuan grade schooler that has great imagination. You know, I'm not saying they aren't unintelligent in any way, but it's not built to last maybe 200, 100 years, but it's really astounding what they're doing nonetheless. So just different, like you're saying.
Now, of course, whenever you're out there doing this, people say, well, did you see any Sasquatches? Well, no, I cannot say I've actually seen a Sasquatch. So I'll tell you that. Well, then have I seen footprints? Well, yes, I think I have seen footprints. And I think I've seen them a number of times. And I have kind of a way that I go about to see these footprints. This first image we're going to look at is an image that the canyon road was closed. And there was a gate across the road, so no vehicles could get up the road. Now, granted, some snowmobiles had been up the road because they could get around the barrier. But no trucks, no vehicles. And this is several miles. This is 7 or 8 miles from the barrier. So this is quite a ways up there. And the barrier is still there. There's still snow in sections on the road, but they're about to open the road. They're going to open the road later on this week. But we get up to the main campground, and the road into the campground is got big patches of snow. So we can't drive the truck into the campground. We have to walk into it because of the large patches of drifted snow across the road. There have been no vehicles on this section going into the campground. I mean, we'd see them in the snow if there had been. And we get to a point near where actually one of the cabin structures that we looked at earlier in the video were there. And I stepped off the road, and there right next to the road was this footprint that we see in this first photo. And more towards the center, you can see where it's the dark mud and the white snow, and you see the straight line, which would be the left side of the foot. This would have been, I believe, the right foot, okay? You can see the left side in a straight line, and you can make out what I would appear to be 4 toes. 1, 2, 3, 4 across the top. And you can see my foot. Now, I'm a size 14 shoe, so I've got a 14 to 15-inch foot. And you can see I tried to line up the heel with the heel here, and this extends 3 or 4 inches beyond my toe. So this is probably 17 or 18-inch footprint here, considerably wider through the toes than what mine is. And in my opinion, this is a cotton picking pretty clear footprint. But also you have to remember, no person came up here with fake feet on. No one has been up here. We are the first ones up here in this spring, and this is what we saw. Now, this next one just looks more like a depression in the dirt. There's a stick off to the left side, and there appear to be some toes right there. It looks to be pretty long and pretty narrow. This is actually a pretty cotton-picking long foot. This is, again, 17, 18 inches long or longer. I had an image, and the next image down below this shows my foot next to some artwork that I put into where I see this track. Okay, so if you kind of pan back and forth, you can see what is the original track, my foot, and this other track to get kind of an idea of where I view the track being. But again, this is not a real clear track. This is definitely not a good enough track to cast. So you could say my imagination was crazy. Well, maybe. Okay.
On this one, I kind of like it because it potentially, again, I'm not sure, it seems to arch in the way that that mid-tarsal break.
Now, the next one to me is just incredibly fascinating. This is a handprint, okay? This was out near what that Sasquatch village was a year before the Sasquatch village appeared, okay? You can see my foot, and to the right of my foot, now it's very difficult to see the first time, is a handprint. I've added some artwork down below it to show how the handprint sits in the dirt. You can see how wide the hand is. It's wider than my foot, which is wider than my hand would be. And the fingers appear to be a little shorter than what my fingers would be. And if you scroll back and forth, you can more make out the handprint as it sits next to the foot if you're able to go back and forth between the two. And again, no one had really been into here. Nobody was putting their hands in the dirt. Also, there were a whole bunch of other depressions in that I'm convinced were footprints in this area, but there must have been 30, 40, or maybe, 50 more, but I couldn't really make out toes on most of them. So I took pictures of some of them, but I really couldn't make a strong case for some of those others. This next is not my photograph. This is of Nathan Rio. He took this photograph. I never personally saw this footprint. This looks pretty convincing to me. Do you know any more about this? Did you ever talk to him about this footprint?
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, I believe this is right before he had a very dramatic bluff charge. He was taking photos, and this is the one where it came out and it was cracking trees, pulling the roots up, and you can hear the gravel falling down and shaking everything. So I think, if I remember right, this is right before it, and he was taking these photos.
And, again, if there was one of these or two of these in the woods that you'd ever seen, you could poo-poo them and say, well, there's nothing there. Maybe somebody's doing something. But these are visible enough that when I go now up in the woods, I try to go days after rainstorms when the ground is still a little soft in areas where I've seen some traces of these things. And invariably, at least not all the time, but, maybe 30% of the time, I'll find some things that I think are tracks, okay, in these particular areas. Now, the next one was a huge footprint that I found in an area completely different than what we've talked about so far. This is an enormous track, okay, and it absolutely dwarfs my foot. My foot, you can see what appears to be the front of the foot. It looks like 3 toes, though I think there's got to be more toes than that, but they're not making the impression in the dirt. And my foot is about half the length of this foot. I mean, this thing is huge. And this happened to be in an area that was pretty dry, but this was one little marshy spot, okay, and that you didn't really see until you were stepping along and then suddenly your feet sunk in the mud. And that's where this happened to be when I was up in this canyon. Now, the next one here shows my foot against this footprint. To give you an idea, my 14-inch long foot is about the length of the top half of this footprint. I mean, this is just incredibly huge. What, 28 inches or who knows, 25 inches? I'm afraid to even guess. You know what I mean? This cotton picking print was so huge. But anyway, this is one that I found. I found several other depressions, but nothing that I was really convinced about.
And I noticed on this one it says followed out of area. Were you followed out after you took these photos? I'm just curious.
Yeah, this is a particular area that I've gone into, and I don't have the guts to go in there in the pitch black. But I've gone out there right at the light of the day where it's getting real dark. And, I've been out in the woods enough that I'm always listening for the squirrels and the birds. And they will typically chatter and alarm when there's a predator in an area. And I've known this because I used to go out in the woods with a predator call. And I would sit down and blow on the calls, and then I'd hear the birds or the squirrels, and they'd move along and I'd hear them, and they'd kind of move through the trees along an area. And I remember standing up, and as they were moving in towards me, and then suddenly there was a bobcat or a coyote or a fox or something right there in front of me, and I soon realized these cotton-picking squirrels in that were not only just alarming, but they would stay up in the trees and chatter right above them to, I guess, alarm other squirrels or other animals in the area that there's something dangerous down below. Well, several times I've gone out very late in the day, usually where you're not hearing the squirrels and that, and I hear them chattering, moving through the trees, and I can't say I really heard footfalls, but I heard breaking and snapping and, in the brush, big, heavy breaking and snapping. But I didn't see anything. So you could say, well, it could have been an elk. It would have been too big for a deer, but it could have been an elk. There are some moose in this area. It could have been a moose. I'd have to grant somebody saying, yeah, that's possible. But whatever it is, there was something pretty big off in the brush. And it's been a couple of times, and they seem to follow me out of this particular section of the woods. This section's always gotten me a little bit squeamish, like I say, a little spooky, because it has a feeling there's something there. Now, is that my imagination? Well, I'd let you decide that.
And with moose, it seems like they just kind of do their own thing, where they either don't notice you, or if it's a certain time of year and it's male, they might, attack you. But I've never heard of one so curious it kind of stays back in the brush and slowly follows you out. That's be really weird.
No, to tell you the truth, I've never heard of that. I've kicked out moose a few times. They aren't really, they are here, but they're not that common. And usually you hear them snort and then they just charge off. They don't hang around. But I'm not up there in the rut too, so when a big bull would be messing around. But I have done it. I've heard them snort and then charge off through the brush. And elk are the same thing. They don't follow you. They see you and they usually are hightailing it out of dodge pretty quick. The only time I get close to elk are when you've got a female elk that's got a calf on the ground. Then I've been able to get within 20, 30 yards of them before they bolt away, and then found the calves, and that's always kind of neat to see these brand new newborn calves. In fact, right here at the end of May, the elk are going to be calving here, so I'm going to get out and try to see as much of that as I can, because up these nearby canyons, the last several springs I've been able to find baby calves each year, several times in fact.
Yeah, I came across them last year. I was surprised they're usually lighter in color. I didn't realize that. They're kind of almost a tan color in comparison.
Yeah. When they get a little bigger, they get tan, but the brand new ones, the newborn ones, just a day or two old, are dark in color with their white spots. Yeah, but the little bigger ones, but they lay on the ground until they're about a month old. Because I've kicked out the brownish ones several times, and
I've never seen that,
Yeah, but the brown ones anyway, when I've kicked those out, they run off. But the little tiny ones, they just curl up right there on the ground. They try not to move. You'll see them bat their eyes or blink their eyes, and you see them breathing, but they're not moving. Anyway, I just think that's really neat. Okay, now the next photos we've got here. This is right after the 1st of April, and the canyon was closed, and there was a snowstorm over the weekend. And this is a Monday morning, okay? In this area of the canyon, the snow had been completely clear, and then the snowstorm came in, I think it was Saturday night. Okay, so it's snowy Saturday night and Sunday morning. And so these tracks had to appear between Sunday morning and Monday morning when I saw them. And this is a trackway just beyond where the gate was closed. And actually, I figured there were probably 5 or 6 different individuals based on different size tracks and different sort of stride lengths and things like that. This first track is going straight up a hill, and the first one I found. This you can see off to the right. There's a set of tracks. They're a little bit obliterated, and apparently this creature was dragging a bough or had something that was dragging behind it up the hill, because the tracks were visible but a little bit kind of blurred with snow. Look, it just looked like something had been drugged. Now, the footprints immediately to the left are my footprints, and you can see how my footprints are, first of all, a lot smaller. But remember, I've got a good-sized foot, 14, 15-inch foot. They're much narrower. Looks like I'm walking T-legged, you know what I mean, because they're pointed outwards, where the tracks on the right are basically in a straight line going straight up the hill. Now, the hill got pretty steep and it got moist. So up at the top, these tracks on the right, the Sasquatch tracks, just kept plowing straight up the hill. I couldn't go any further. And then the third set, way off on the left, you can see they're turned sideways. I had to basically sidestep down the hill in order to make it back. I couldn't walk straight down it. You can't really tell how steep the hill is from this photograph because things aren't in the right configuration. But that's what you see. And I don't know how those tracks on the far right could be anything but a Sasquatch's tracks.
Yeah, it almost looks like, even though you're saying a little obliterated, it seems like I can see some toes at least detect that. Also, like you're saying, it always looks a lot flatter. You just can't get the dimensions, the 3D perspective, really, of what its slope is.
Yeah. You have to understand one other thing. This was a bright, sunny day, and it was so bright that I had to basically make my ISO all the way up to like 1/4000th or 4000, diaphragm, you know what I mean, just as small as I could. So I actually, by looking through the camera lens, couldn't see what I was photographing. It was that reflective. Okay, the surface was. So I took a couple of pictures of close-up tracks. Well, I couldn't tell how good or how not so good they were until I could get back and actually look at the photos to see what was really there. The next picture down is a close-up. You can see my footprints on the left. You can see the footprints plowing straight up the hill on the right. The bottom trackway on the far right, there appear to be some toes visible in that one for sure. And you can see how mine are much closer together, how mine are splayed out. And again, mine are much closer than normally they would be if I was walking on flat ground. But this is a pretty steep cut picking hill.
Yeah, when I'm going up a really steep hill, one of the things I have to do is kind of, like you're doing, put your feet kind of to the sides, to shuffle up it almost.
Sure.
Yeah, because otherwise that slick surface, you're going to slide right down.
And then, and like I said, when I came down, I had to just turn completely sideways and just sidestep down. I couldn't walk straight down the hill. It was too slippery. I'd have fallen down. Now, this third photo, this is a different trackway altogether, okay? And this, rather than going uphill, is going downhill. And this is a couple of 100 yards from the footprints we're talking about. And this is actually right on the road. And the Sasquatch tracks are on the center right. And you see they're pretty much in a straight line going downhill. And you see my tracks on the left. And again, you can kind of see my tracks because they're splayed out, not quite in a straight line, and they're closer together. Now, being that this is more downhill, I'm able to take longer strides here, but still these strides, they've got 3 footprints in what are basically about 4.5 of my footprints. And I'm a pretty good sized guy. Again, I'm 6'3". So if this was a person, it had to have been someone 6'8", 6'9", who knows? A lot taller than I am to get this distance. And then to walk in such a straight line, well, people just don't do that.
How far would you say that stride is between footprints? Was it 3 or 4 feet at least?
Well, mine are over here on the left side. I did measure mine, and my stride, if I'm moving pretty good, is about 36 inches. These were a little closer together than that. So I figured mine are probably averaging about 32 inches. So I would say you're probably close to 40 inches or so, and maybe more from heel to the end of the toe on the Sasquatch. Yeah, so 4 feet would be 48. So you're probably 3.5 feet. But remember, again, this is a slicker surface, and you're going downhill a little bit. So ourselves, or even a Sasquatch, probably wouldn't be as wide as they would normally open up on flat ground, on a dry ground. But they're still much, much longer than what a person would have had. I would have had to kind of jump and run down the hill to do that, and had I done that, you'd have just seen several places where I'd have face planted in the snow. It was too slippery to do that.
Yeah, those look, again, I would guesstimate 35% longer than yours, at least stride per stride.
Yeah,
maybe.
I would think that's pretty safe bet. If stride length is a direct, attribute to height, 30% taller than me, that's another 2 feet taller than I am. That's 8 feet, 8.5 feet tall. If they equate that way, I can't say they do or don't. Now, the next photograph, this is one that I took near a wigwam type structure that we haven't seen pictures of here. And you see my footprint over on the left. The Sasquatch footprint is on the right. And this one, I think you clearly see the the arch separation and the toes in this one over on the right-hand side. I did a little of artwork just below this, so it's a little clearer of where the toes are and how the foot's at. If you kind of go back and forth, you can kind of see that between those footprints. This had been there a while, but it was a pretty deep print, and I had no doubt that it was a footprint. And it was right next to a structure that I had felt definitely had been built by Sasquatches. So that kind of ends what they are. The point is, what you've got to say is that, well, yeah, I found footprints by going up in the woods and finding the structure. And it takes the right kind of looking and looking at the right times and looking around structures and areas where they'd be. But I found them. I know I've been up with Rio. I don't know if I've seen some with you, Rex, but I think we were both up there with Rio once when he found some footprints.
Yeah,
is that right?
Yeah, he found some pretty clear ones. I'd have to dig those. I took some samples of those up somewhere. I could have those. But yeah, he found some time we were out together. Well,
in going out there with Rio, his vision is 100 times better than mine. He would see this stuff that I would overlook, and then he pointed out to me and showed me where it was, and then it was very clear once he pointed out to me, but I would miss him. So there may have been all sorts of things that I saw when I wasn't around him that he would have picked up on.
I think that concludes everything we wanted to cover.